Wu Jiao Ianshaw. Forgive my tone. I'm going to really give an example of some of the kind of issues that Philip was talking about in his paper. And I wanted to talk about a system of introducing electronic records for children in need and children at risk in the UK. It's called the Integrated Children's System, and I want to talk in the context of these kinds of concerns that have been raised already. So my approach, the questions I'm asking are rather critical questions, but the response that I want to suggest from the data is slightly different from some of the responses that have come in the literature. There are various papers, that's not quite all of them there, but one of the papers there, the third one down, Philip mentioned in his presentation. I'm mainly drawing on the first paper there about technology, evidence and professional practice. And the Integrated Children's System is a system of recording set around 26 rather substantial, lengthy, what are called exemplar record formats. Went national in the beginning of 2007. And as one respected body referring to the final report of our research for the government for England and Wales said correctly that the government declined to publish an academic report on the Integrated Children's System that it had commissioned, which had questioned whether the system was fit for purpose, instead attributing the difficulties to social workers' resistance to change. So, I should say, some of you may know about the case always referred to as Baby Peter, a child who died in London 18 months ago maybe. It was in that context that the research suddenly got a kind of second life, put it mildly. It was a fairly extensive project. I'm not going to go into the methodology, but the slides will be on the UCETA site, and the full report is available on my homepage. You'll be familiar with these kind of policy aspirations behind this kind of development. I'm not going to go through these, they've been referred to already. I wanted to reflect on two questions. First, the different ways in which the experience of the Integrated Children's System had an effect on social work practice, both managers and practitioners, and to ask whether the Integrated Children's System has consequences for the exercise of discretion and judgment, and hence the way in which evidence is constructed in children's services. And I just want to run through, just with illustrating quotations, some of our main conclusions. First, which we had quite a bit to say, is about the way in which technology appears to shape practice. A bit in italics are the kind of sub-points here. First, we said it partializes practice, illustrated by that quote when a social worker says, what is lost in that is the child. You don't get a picture of the child and their needs. It's all lost in these questions and jargon. It's very difficult for another professional to read it and get a picture of the child. And then it shaped practice, secondly, by shaping what counted as important. In other words, that the record system was not neutral. It didn't simply provide a way of depicting practice. It actually shaped what was thought or conveyed to be important. So in one very interesting set of minutes from an implementation group, which we had full access to, there is still some ambiguity about the best process for recording non-complex child in need cases. In particular, it's not clear whether social workers should be using the child's plan or whether it's sufficient to use the plan at the end of an initial assessment. Now that sounds like a jargon technical thing, but what that person is really saying is, when you get a case which is regarded as not important, should it be recorded as something relatively big, or should it be recorded as something relatively small? So that was a big issue that came up a lot. Tended still to shape practice by fixing the evidence. This same set of minutes where somebody raised concerns about the way in which the integrated children's system solution dealt with changes, day-to-day changes, and a concern that it made it more difficult to record day-to-day changes. Therefore, the image of practice, of assessment, analysis, tended to get fixed rather than to respond to actual changes. And it tended in some ways to, as we put it, to pre-code practice. So there was a big debate about how that there was a number of limits on the number of characters that people could type into a particular box. And of course that reflected again what counted as important. So it tended to pre-code, preset practice. And then it tended to affect language in a way we thought was quite interesting. So that terms like front end, populate, drop down, enter the discourse as technical expressions, but come to have a kind of metaphorical force that's conveying something about how social work works, that it can be modelled like a technology solution. But more positively, we thought that it helped to disentangle practice. As someone helpfully said, I think what it has done is to bring to the surface an issue that was already problematic. Well, it wasn't a problem, because we didn't realise it was a problem, but the ICS helped us to realise this was a problem that we had to sort out. But, again, more critically, it tended to distance service users. The government sold this system as, in fact, enhancing opportunities for working closely with service users. And there's a couple of quotations there, which I won't repeat, which was very common about the way in which it was felt to distance and in some way dehumanize the service user. And had effects on practitioners as well, and a sense of reducing autonomy and so on. But on the right-hand side, I really think this is important, that what somebody has called the moral context of form completion included the apparent presence of tactics to defend service users, whereby service users were deliberately not told about the ICS, or that forms were adapted locally to fit local needs. And when it was seen as being unrealistic, it was soft-pedaled, it was downplayed, it was minimised. And there's an example there, one key informant into, we're actually now looking at the content of the documentation in ways we didn't for the first 12 months, because we tried to keep the integrity of the exemplars. It didn't seem sensible to us to fiddle about with them before we tried them. So now we tried them, and we're looking at ways in which we can refine them without taking stuff out, but just making them helpful to practitioners rather than things that are seen as a hindrance. Quite an important way of seeing things, I think. And this was occasionally recognised in some of the documents, the official government documents and reviews of this. Well, what are our conclusions? First, that ICT is not intrinsically, we don't think, a moral instrument. We do think it is neutral. Clearly that it's going to grow in association with broad social work services. And while there's no formal reason why the professional role would become more technology-led, there are dynamics that will continue to make that likely. So expertise, for instance, and therefore power, is located with developers, not beneficiaries, whether those beneficiaries be social workers or service users. And we need to consider the practitioner service user in this context. There's a tendency, as I've said, from good motives to seek to insulate the service user from ICT, but that may well have negative ends. There's need, I think, to have participatory development approaches. So our conclusion here is that taking a slightly different view to the rather bleak kind of information society analysis of people like Nigel Parton and others, that social workers are not moral dopes, as somebody has said, standing mute at the margins of everyday responsibilities. Rather, they are sensitive to the consistencies and contradictions between what they claim to know about clients and what they're requested to document. It's an analysis by an old paper, but very illuminating one by Jay Gubrian, sociologist. I concur with Tony Evans and John Harris when, in a different context, they remark the exaggerated depth of discretion and remark that the existence of rules is not inevitably the death knell of discretion. Rather, by creating rules, organisations create discretion. Thank you.